Wow. Mind blown.
Every story's got a spark, and every spark's got a name. This is the journey of finding mine. Who am I when the lights go low? Who am I when the world says no? Searching through my past, trying to free my soul, one truth at a time, letting every story unfold.
What if the version of you that got you here is not the version of you that can take you where you're supposed to go? What if your struggles is not proof that you're lost, but what if it's proof that you're becoming? What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Who Am I podcast, where we take time to reflect, heal, grow, and ask the questions that really matter. Once again, I'm your host, Jeff Hopgood, and I'm grateful you're here with me today. But before we go any further, take a quick second and make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications so you never miss an episode. And if this podcast has been helping you reflect, reset, and grow, share it with somebody else who may need it too. What we're doing here is that we're building a real community here, and I'm thankful for every single one of you. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever looked at your life and realized you don't fit who you used to be anymore? But you also don't fully recognize who you're becoming yet. Yeah, that space right there, that in between space, that uncomfortable, uncertain, stretching place, a lot of people panic in that space. A lot of people think something is wrong in that space. But what if nothing is wrong? What if that tension you feel is not failure? What if that discomfort is not confusion? What if it's transformation? Because sometimes the hardest part of growth is not starting over. Sometimes the hardest part of growth is releasing the old version of yourself that no longer fits. And that's what we're talking about today. Today's episode is called Who Am I Becoming? Not who did I used to be, not just who am I right now, but who am I becoming? Because identity is not a fixed statue. It is a journey, it is a movement, it is layers, it is seasons, healing, unlearning, evolving, and becoming. So here's today's question. Am I holding on to who I was or embracing who I'm becoming? Let's talk about it. But before we go any further, before we get into the heart of today's episode, I have to check in with you. I need to know, how are you really? How are you really doing? And you already know my style. I am not looking for the quick answer. I'm not looking for the automatic answer. I'm not looking for the answer that you give to people because it's easier than explaining what's actually going on inside of you. How are you for real? Are you tired? Are you discouraged? Are you hopeful? Are you in transition? Are you healing from something nobody knows you're carrying? Are you trying to stay strong while privately asking God, what season am I in right now? Are you smiling on the outside while trying to figure yourself out on the inside? If that's you, take a breath. Because I want to remind you of something right here at the beginning. You do not have to have every answer to still be making progress. Let me say that again. You do not have to have every answer to still be making progress. Some of you are being too hard on yourself because you thought by now you would be further along. You thought by now you would have more clarity. You thought by now you would feel more settled, more secure, more confident, more certain. But growth does not always feel clear while you're in it. Sometimes growth feels like confusion before it feels like clarity. Sometimes growth feels like grief before it feels like freedom. Sometimes growth feels like losing pieces of yourself before you realize you were only shedding what you were never meant to keep. And I want to speak to the person today who feels like they are in a season of internal change. Maybe your circle is changing. Maybe your values are sharpening. Maybe your patience is changing. Maybe your desires are changing. Maybe your tolerance for dysfunction is changing. Maybe the things that used to excite you don't move you the same way anymore. Maybe the place you used to fit now feels too small for you. That does not always mean you're broken. Sometimes it means you're growing. Sometimes it means that the old version of you cannot fully live in the new season that's calling your name. And I know that can feel lonely because people often celebrate your arrival, but they don't always understand your transitions. They knew who you were. They got used to who you were. They built expectations around who you were. So when you start becoming somebody deeper, wiser, healthier, stronger, more intentional, sometimes even the people around you don't know how to respond. And if we're being honest, sometimes we don't know how to respond either. Because there is grief in growth. There is grief in outgrowing old mindsets. There is grief in releasing old habits. There is grief in realizing the old version of you survived, but cannot lead you into the next chapter of your life. So if you're in that place today, I want to tell you this. You're not behind. You are not lost. You are not failing. You are not too late. You are not having to start all over from scratch. You are becoming. And becoming is holy work. Becoming is deep work. Becoming is patient work. Becoming is unseen work. Becoming is often quiet work. So once again, one more time, take a breath. Give yourself permission to be in process. Give yourself permission to not have to have it all tied up neatly, yet give yourself permission to say, I may not fully understand this season, but I trust that something is happening in me. Because it is. You're still growing, still learning, still healing, still stretching, and yes, you are still becoming. And I want you to hear this clearly before we move forward. The fact that you are questioning who you are becoming is not a bad sign. It may actually be proof that you are awake. It may be proof that you are paying attention. It may be proof that your soul is refusing to stay stagnant. It may be proof that something greater is calling you forward. So today, don't resist the work. Don't run from the questions. Don't rush the process. Sit with it. Because maybe the reason this season feels unfamiliar is because you're meeting a version of yourself you've never known before. And maybe that version of you is exactly who you've been praying to become. So let's go there. Let's talk about what it means to evolve, to mature, to heal, to stretch, and to keep moving, even when who you're becoming feels unfamiliar. This episode is for the person who can feel change happening on the inside. This is for the person who knows they are not who they used to be. This is for the person who is learning that identity is not a place you arrive at one time and stay there forever. Identity, my friend, is a journey. And the truth is, you're always becoming. So let's talk about looking back at your different selves. So when I look back over my life, I can see different versions of me. I can see the younger me with dreams I couldn't fully explain yet. I can see the version of me trying to prove myself. I can see the version of me learning responsibilities. I can see the version of me trying to be strong, trying to lead, trying to survive, trying to make sense of the pressure, expectations, purpose, pain, growth, all of it. I can see seasons. I can see moments where I was confident. I can see moments where I was unsure. I can see moments where I was bold, where I was still becoming. And the truth is, every season required something different from me. There was a season where I needed courage. There was a season where I needed discipline. There was a season where I needed humility. There was a season where I needed healing. There was a season where I needed to stop performing and start reflecting. There was a season where I had to stop asking, how do I look? And start asking, who am I really? And that's one of the deepest truths about identity. Who you are is not disconnected from what you've lived through. The experience that shaped you, the responsibilities shape you, the losses shape you, the wins, the relationships, the heartbreak, the callings, and the pressure, they all shape who you are. But here's what I've learned. Just because something shaped you does not mean it gets to define you forever. That's important because sometimes we become loyal to a version of ourselves that was only meant for one season. We cling to the old version because it feels familiar. We cling to the old versions because it helped us survive. We cling to the old versions because it was necessary once, but necessary then does not always mean necessary now. There are versions of you that were built to survive pain. There were versions of you that were built to navigate through the confusions of life. There are versions of you that were built to endure environments where you had to stay guarded, stay sharp, stay ready, stay careful. And I want you to honor all of that because some of those versions of you carried you through many storms, But eventually, you have to ask, is this version of me still helping me grow, or is it only helping me stay familiar? And my friend, that question matters. It really does. Because familiarity can feel safe, but it can also keep you stuck. And some people are not failing to grow because they lack potential. They are failing to grow because they keep trying to drag old identities into new seasons. Growth requires letting go. See, one of the hardest truths about becoming is this: growth requires loss. Not necessarily loss of life, not always loss of opportunity, but often loss of old patterns, loss of old thinking, loss of old comfort zones, loss of old labels, loss of old versions of yourself. And that part is hard because we don't usually talk enough about the grief that comes with growth. See, everybody likes the idea of elevation. Everybody likes the idea of transformation. Everybody likes the idea of reaching the next level. But what people do not always tell you is that the next level growth often requires next level surrender. You may have to surrender the version of you that needed constant approval. You may have to surrender the version of you that kept shrinking to make others comfortable. You may have to surrender the version of you that confused being needed with being valued. You may have to surrender the version of you that found identity only in titles, roles, or external successes. And that can be difficult because sometimes those things become attached to how we see ourselves. Maybe you already knew yourself as the strong one. Maybe you already knew yourself as the fixer. Maybe you already knew yourself as the one who always carried everybody else. Maybe you knew yourself as the one who never slowed down, or as the one who pushed through everything and never admitted you were tired. But what happens when becoming healthy requires you to no longer live that way? What happens when becoming whole requires you to be softer, more honest, more surrendered, more discerning, more at peace, more willing to say no, more willing to rest, more willing to let God define you instead of performance defining you? That can feel like death to the old self. And sometimes it is, but not a bad death, but a necessary one. Think about that for a second. And I say that because of this. Not every version of you is meant to live forever. Some versions of you were only temporary. Some versions of you were transitional. Some versions of you were the bridge, not the destination, my friend. And if you keep trying to hold on to who you were, you may miss who you are being invited to become. So let's talk about the fear of becoming someone new. Now, let's be honest here. Let's be honest. A lot of people do not resist growth because they hate the idea of better. They resist growth because becoming something new can feel unfamiliar, and unfamiliar can feel scary. You start changing, and suddenly the way you think is changing. The way you respond is changing. The things you were attracted to are changing. The conversations you can tolerate are changing. Your standards are changing. Your boundaries are changing. Your appetite is changing. Your values are becoming more and more clearer. And sometimes people around you will say things like, "You changed." And sometimes they'll say it like it's an accusation. But let me help somebody right here. Not all change is betrayal. Sometimes change is evidence of healing. Sometimes change is evidence of maturity. Sometimes change is evidence that you finally stopped abandoning yourself. Sometimes change is evidence that your spirit is growing beyond old limitations. Can I say that again? Because that just made me happy. Sometimes change is evidence of healing. Sometimes change is evidence of maturity. Sometimes change is evidence that you finally stop abandoning yourself. Sometimes change is evidence that your spirit is growing beyond old limitations. So, yes, you changed. Maybe you had to. Maybe the old you was too silent. Maybe the old you tolerated too much. Maybe the old you lived for validation. Maybe the old you kept calling survival strength. Maybe the old you kept calling survival strength when really you were exhausted. Maybe the old you learned how to make it through, but not how to truly live free. So, yes, you changed. And changing is not always a sign that you lost yourself. Sometimes it is a sign that you are finally finding yourself. Self-discovery. That's the difference. Because becoming is not about pretending to be somebody's fake. It is about uncovering what is more true. It is about becoming more aligned, more honest, more grounded, more whole. And that journey, it can feel awkward. I have to be honest, it can feel awkward because there will be moments where the old version of you is gone, but the new version of you is still under construction. See, that's that in between space that can make you question everything. You begin to ask, am I doing the right thing? Am I growing or am I just drifting? Am I becoming better or am I just disconnected from what used to be familiar? But sometimes the evidence that you're growing is that what used to fit no longer does. That's not failure, my friend. That's what we call development. Think about it for a second. So let's talk about how identity is a journey and not a destination. And this, I believe, is the heart of the episode right here. Because identity is not a final destination. It is a continual journey. See, a lot of us grow up thinking that one day we're going to arrive. Like one day we're just going to fully figure out ourselves. And then that's it. No more tension, no more questions, no more evolving. That, my friend, is what we call magical thinking. But how many know that life does not work like that? See, life works like this. Every season introduces a new question. Every responsibility reveals new layers. Every challenge exposes new weakness and new strengths. Every chapter of your life invites deeper understanding. So the question is not, have I fully arrived? The question is this: am I open to the ongoing work of becoming? Because becoming never really stops. You learn, you unlearn, you heal, you stretch, you rebuild, you trust again, you surrender again, you mature again. And that is not a sign that something is wrong with you. That is what it means to be alive. That is what it means to be human. That is what it means to grow. You are not meant to stay frozen in one version of yourself for the rest of your life. You are allowed to deepen, to evolve, to become wiser, gentle, become stronger, become more focused, and become more aligned with purpose. You are allowed to become somebody your younger self would not fully understand yet. That is not fake. That is growth. And maybe that's where some of you need freedom today. You keep judging yourself by an outdated version of you. You keep measuring yourself against old expectations, old wounds, old definitions, old habits, old fears, old limitations. But maybe heaven is trying to introduce you to a new version of you, and you keep asking to go back to the old one because at least it feels familiar. No, do not go backwards. Just because forward feels unfamiliar, you are becoming. You have to honor who you were without living there. You have to honor who you were without living there. Allow me to balance this because I think this is important. Releasing old versions of yourself does not mean hating who you used to be. It does not mean dishonoring your past. It does not mean acting like previous versions of you were worthless. It does not mean pretending your earlier chapters did not matter. No, you honor who you were. You honor the younger you that was trying to figure things out. You honor the wounded version of you that was doing the best it could with what it knew. You honor the version of you that kept going when things got heavy. The version of you that refused to quit, give in, throw in the towel. You have to honor the version of you that survived what should have broken you completely. You have to honor the version of you that had enough faith to keep taking the next step. You honor that person, but you do not have to live there forever. That version of you may deserve compassion, but not a permanent residency. I think that's powerful simply because some of us have mastered compassion for our past, but we have not embraced responsibility for our future. And maturity means learning how to do both. See, I can appreciate who I was without being imprisoned by who I was. I can thank the old version of me for getting me here without forcing him to lead me into the next season. I can learn from my past without living under its authority forever. That, my friend, is called growth. And for some of you, this is the permission you need. You do not have to keep introducing yourself through old pains. Stop. You do not have to keep seeing yourself only through what you've been through. Stop. You do not have to keep treating your old survival mode like your forever identity. You are allowed to become. So allow me to slow this down right here so we can take a brief moment to reflect. And I really want you to sit with these. Don't just hear them, but sit with them. I want you to ask yourself this: who am I still trying to become because I'm afraid to let people see that I've changed? See, that's deep. Let me ask that again. Who am I still trying to be because I'm afraid to let people see that I've changed? See, that's deep, because sometimes the reason we stay stuck is not that we don't know change is needed. It's that we are afraid of what people will say if they see us grow in a different direction. Here's another one. Ask yourself this: what version of me am I grieving right now? Maybe you're grieving the younger, more carefree version of yourself. Maybe you're grieving a version of yourself that existed before pain. Maybe you're grieving the version of you that had a certain dream, a certain timeline, a certain picture of life. That grief is real. Been there. Now ask this: what is this current season trying to teach me about who I'm becoming? Is it teaching you patience, boundaries, humility, boldness, faith, discipline, rest, discernment, consistency? And then this one. Ask yourself, am I holding on to an old identity because it is true, or because it is unfamiliar? Because familiar and true are not always the same thing. And finally, ask yourself, what new version of me is trying to emerge right now? Not the version people expect, not the version that performs, not the version that hides, not the version that keeps going numb, but what healthier, stronger, wiser, more honest version of you is trying to emerge right now. Pay attention to that, because sometimes your spirit already knows what your fear is still resisting. You know, when I think about becoming, I often think about how every major season of life introduces you to another layer of yourself. See, there's a version of you before responsibilities. There's a version of you after pressure. There's a version of you before heartbreak. There's a version of you after healing. There's a version of you before leadership. There's a version of you after you realize people are watching how you live, not just listening to what you say. There are different layers. And I think one of the biggest mistakes we make is assuming that growth means we should always feel comfortable in our own skin every step of the way. But no, sometimes becoming feels awkward. Sometimes you can't feel yourself outgrowing a mindset before you fully know what replaces it. Sometimes you can feel yourself pulled into deeper purpose before you have language for it. Sometimes you can feel your soul rejecting what used to satisfy you. And that can be disorienting. But disorienting does not always mean destructive. Sometimes it means God is rearranging something. Sometimes it means your life is making room for a truer version of you. Sometimes it means your values are becoming clearer. It means your voice is becoming stronger. Sometimes it means you are no longer willing to betray your own growth to stay accepted. And that costs something. It can cost comfort, approval, old patterns, some relationships, and it can cost your old self image. But what you gain is deeper alignment. And I would rather go through the discomfort of becoming than spend the rest of my life pretending to still be who I used to be. See, that's a word for somebody. Stop trying to force yourself back into old clothes spiritually, emotionally, mentally, relationally. They don't fit anymore, and that's okay. So here's the lesson for today. Here it is. You are not stuck. You are becoming. Who you are today is not the final version of you. The questions you're asking, the stretching you're feeling, the discomfort you're carrying, the transition you're walking through, it may all be part of your becoming. So do not fear change so much that you resist growth. Do not idolize old versions of yourself so much that you miss the beauty of your evolution. Do not interpret every uncomfortable season as evidence that something is wrong. Sometimes discomfort is the sound of expansion. Sometimes tension is the sign that old limits are breaking. Sometimes confusion is the doorway to deeper clarity. Sometimes surrender is the beginning of strength. So embrace the process. That does not mean every season will feel easy. It does not mean every transition will make sense immediately. It does not mean every loss will feel fair. But it does mean this. You can trust that growth is doing something in you. You can trust that becoming has purpose. You can trust that who you are becoming matters. And maybe the greatest freedom is realizing you do not have to be finished to be valuable. You do not have to be complete to be worthy. You do not have to be fully polished to be purposeful. You do not have to have every piece figured out to still be walking in truth. You are allowed to be in process. So I want you to imagine something with me. Imagine something with me. Imagine meeting the future version of yourself, the healed version, the wiser version, the stronger version, the more surrendered version, the more grounded version. The version of you that learned how to stop shrinking. The version of you that learned how to trust the process. The version of you that stopped apologizing for growth. The version of you that became comfortable with becoming. What would that version of you say to you right now? I think that version of you would say this: keep going. I know this feels unfamiliar, but keep going. I know you miss part of who you used to be, but keep going. I know the in-between feels uncomfortable, but keep going. I know growth feels lonely sometimes, but keep going. I know you're questioning what's changing in you, but keep going. Because one day you're going to look back and realize this season was not the season that broke you. It was the season that introduced you to yourself. And when that day comes, you'll understand that the tension was necessary, the questions were necessary, the reflections was necessary, the pruning process was necessary, the surrender was necessary, because who you are becoming is worth it. So no, don't cling to an outdated version of yourself just because it's familiar. Honor your past. Learn from your past. Thank God for how far you've come, but keep moving. Because the journey is not over. The work is not done. The growth is not over. You are still becoming. So say this with me: I am not stuck. I am becoming. I release the version of me that no longer fits where I'm going. I honor who I was, but I embrace who I am becoming. I will not fear growth. I will not resist change. I will not run from the process. Every season is shaping me. Every lesson is strengthening me. Every step is teaching me. I am evolving with purpose. I am growing with grace. I am becoming who I was always meant to be. So I want you to sit with this question today. Am I holding on to who I was, or embracing who I'm becoming? Simply because that question can change your life if you let it. So before we move forward, I want you to pause for just a moment. Take a breath. Wherever you are, whatever you're carrying, this next part is for you. Let's speak life over ourselves out loud if you can. Because what we say in this moment has the power to shift how we walk into the rest of our day. So let's begin with our affirmation. I am not defined by my past or limited by my mistakes. I am growing, learning, and becoming who I was created to be. I have values beyond titles, roles, and expectations. I choose honesty over fear and growth over comfort. I am allowed to change, heal, and evolve. I walk with purpose, clarity, and courage. I am becoming more aligned with my true self every day. And who I am is enough. So as we close today's episode, I want to thank you for taking this time for yourself. If something you heard inspired you, challenged you, or made you pause and reflect, please don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with someone who may need it. Invite them into the conversation. See, this podcast grows when we grow together. I cannot do this without you. See, we grow together through shared stories, honest reflections, and real connections. Every listen, every share, every conversation helps create a community rooted in love, rooted in purpose, rooted in hope, rooted in faith, rooted in trust and truth. So until next time, keep reflecting, keep becoming, and remember, you matter. This is the Who Am I podcast, and let's walk this journey together.
Who am I? Yeah, I'm more than the pain, more than the pride. Who am I? Who am I? Walking in purpose, no mask, no disguise. This is my voice, my rise, my life. Welcome to Who Am I?